I remember the exact moment everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of unremarkable night you'd never expect to stick in your memory. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through the channels aimlessly, while Melissa, my wife of 8 years, was upstairs getting ready to go out. She'd mentioned earlier that she had plans with her friends. A dinner or something casual, she said. But something felt off. For weeks I'd noticed little things. A growing distance between us. Her sudden interest in dressing up more, even for the simplest errands. The way her phone seemed glued to her hand. Her face lighting up at messages she'd quickly hide if I walked by. I told myself I was being paranoid. Melissa was my wife, my partner, the woman who promised me forever. But the knot in my stomach told a different story. As I sat there, the sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood floor pulled me from my thoughts. She appeared in the doorway, stunning as always, wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. It hugged her figure in a way that left no doubt it was meant to impress. My heart sank a little. I wasn't sure who she was trying to impress, but I had a sinking feeling it wasn't me. "You look nice," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks," she replied, her voice light, almost dismissive. "Don't wait up. I might be late." I don't know what came over me in that moment. Maybe it was weeks of suspicion finally boiling over, or maybe it was the way she avoided my eyes when she spoke. But before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. "Melissa, who are you really going to see tonight?" Her hand froze on the door handle. She turned to face me, her expression a mix of shock and annoyance. "What kind of question is that?" she snapped. "I told you, I'm meeting my friends. And I'm supposed to believe that? You've been distant for weeks, Melissa. You're always on your phone. You barely talk to me anymore. And now this." My voice cracked, betraying the hurt I tried to keep hidden. Her eyes narrowed. "Brian, you're being ridiculous. You're imagining things." "Am I?" I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. "Because it doesn't feel like I am. If I'm wrong, tell me. But look me in the eye and say there's nothing going on." For a moment she hesitated. That tiny pause spoke louder than any words ever could. My chest tightened as I realized I might not be ready for whatever truth she was hiding. "I don't have time for this," she said, turning back to the door. "I need to go." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "All right, Melissa, go ahead. But know this, the moment you step out that door, our marriage is over. Don't even think about coming back." She froze, her hand hovering over the doorknob. For the first time in weeks, she looked at me, really looked at me. There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt? Fear? Couldn't tell. But she didn't say a word. Instead, she opened the door and walked out, letting it slam shut behind her. And just like that, my world fell apart. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the door, hoping she'd come back, hoping she'd realize what she was risking and choose us. But deep down, I knew she wouldn't. Whatever had been happening behind my back had already taken her too far from me. That night, I sat alone in the dark, grappling with a storm of emotions. Anger, heartbreak, disbelief. How had we gotten here? How had the woman I loved more than anything become a stranger standing on the other side of a door I never thought I'd have to close? I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Life as I knew it was over, and somehow I'd have to figure out how to pick up the pieces. That first night after Melissa walked out felt like an eternity. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you, suffocating and unbearable. I sat in the same spot on the couch, staring at the door as if willing her to come back. But she didn't. Eventually, I forced myself to move. My legs felt heavy, my chest tight with the weight of everything I was feeling. I wandered into the kitchen, hoping a glass of water would help clear my mind. Instead, I found myself gripping the counter, staring at the empty space where her favorite coffee mug usually sat. It hit me then, this wasn't just about one night. This was about everything we had built together slowly unraveling before my eyes. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed the scene from earlier. Her hesitation, her refusal to meet my gaze, The way she left without a second thought. It was like a bad movie on repeat, each frame more painful than the last. By morning, I hadn't slept a wink. The following days weren't much better. Melissa didn't call, didn't text, nothing. Part of me wanted to reach out, to ask her where she was and if she was okay. But every time I picked up my phone, I stopped myself. I wasn't the one who left. If she wanted to talk, she'd have to make the first move. Instead, I threw myself into work. My colleagues noticed something was off. They kept asking if I was all right, offering concerned looks when I gave half-hearted answers. Just tired, I'd say. It wasn't a complete lie. I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, in every way possible. Then, on the third day, I came home to find the house exactly as I'd left it. Empty and cold. I walked into the bedroom, my chest tightening at the sight of her side of the bed still untouched. Her things were still there. Clothes in the closet, her perfume on the dresser. But it all felt like a ghost of what used to be. As I stood there, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. My heart leapt, hoping it was her. But when I picked it up, my stomach sank. It was a text from an unfamiliar number. "Hey Brian, I think you deserve to know what's been going on. Can we talk?" I stared at the message, my mind racing. Who was this? What did they know? My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I finally typed back. "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly. "A friend." A friend? That wasn't exactly reassuring. I debated whether to respond, but curiosity got the better of me. "What do you mean?" There was a pause, long enough to make me wonder if they'd changed their mind. Then another message appeared. "Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. I'll explain everything." I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. It felt like a trap, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore it. If there was even a chance this person could tell me what was really going on, I had to take it. The next day dragged on endlessly. By the time 6 p.m. rolled around, I was a bundle of nerves. I walked into the coffee shop, scanning the room for anyone who looked like they might be expecting me. That's when I saw her, a woman in her late 30s, sitting alone at a corner table. She looked up as I approached, her expression both hesitant and determined. "Brian?" she asked softly. I nodded, taking a seat across from her. "You said you had something to tell me." She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly around her coffee cup. "I don't know how to say this, but I know Melissa, and I know what she's been doing." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "She's been seeing someone else," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to get involved, but when I saw how hurt you were the other night, I couldn't stay quiet anymore." The other night? My mind raced, trying to piece everything together. "Wait, were you there?" "Where?" "At the bar," she admitted. Melissa wasn't with her friends. She was with him. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Who is he?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. She hesitated, looking down at her cup. "I don't know much about him. I've only seen him a few times. But I thought you should know." I leaned back in my chair, my head spinning. Part of me wanted to storm out and confront Melissa right then and there, but another part of me knew I needed to think this through. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. "Because you deserve better," she said simply. "And because you deserve the truth." I left the coffee shop that evening with more questions than answers. As I walked home, her words echoed in my mind. "You deserve better. You deserve the truth." For the first time in days, I felt a spark of clarity. Whatever Melissa was hiding, I was going to find out. And this time, there would be no turning back. Walking home that evening felt like wading through a fog. Every step carried a mix of anger, confusion, and a gnawing sense of betrayal. The woman at the coffee shop, Claire, she had introduced herself before I left, didn't give me much to work with. She didn't know who this guy was or how long it had been going on, but she was certain about one thing. Melissa wasn't with her friends that night. And now, the lies Melissa had been feeding me started to unravel. When I got home, I sat at the dining table, staring blankly at my phone. 1,000 thoughts ran through my mind. Should I confront her? Should I wait for her to come clean? Should I even give her the chance? My hand hovered over the screen, tempted to call or text her, but something inside me stopped. If Melissa had been lying to me for weeks, maybe months, what were the chances she'd tell me the truth now? Instead, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I started looking for answers myself. It wasn't hard to figure out where to start. Melissa's phone had been practically glued to her hand recently, and her sudden obsession with privacy wasn't lost on me. I hated the idea of snooping, but I told myself it wasn't snooping if it was your own wife, right? I opened the laptop and logged into our shared phone account. It took a few clicks to pull up her call and text history. At first glance, everything seemed normal, until I noticed one number that popped up over and over again. Late-night calls, long durations, dozens of texts every day. My stomach twisted into knots. I didn't recognize the number, but it was clear whoever this person was, they were important enough to take up most of her time. I copied the number into a search engine, my fingers trembling as I typed. Nothing came up. No name, no connection, just a blank void that left me feeling even more helpless. Frustrated, I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Who was this person? And how long had this been going on? The next morning, Melissa came home. The sound of the front door opening jolted me awake. I hadn't realized I'd fallen asleep on the couch, but the stiffness in my neck was a painful reminder. I sat up as she walked in, dressed casually as if it were just another day. Her hair was slightly messy, and she had that glow people get after a good time. It made my stomach churn. "Good morning," she said, avoiding my eyes as she slipped off her shoes. "Sorry I didn't text. It got late, and I didn't want to wake you." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I watched her closely, looking for any hint of guilt or remorse. She busied herself in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water as if nothing had happened. It was infuriating. "Did you have fun last night?" I finally asked, my voice as steady as I could manage. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Yeah, it was nice to catch up with the girls. We stayed out later than I expected." "Really?" I said, leaning forward slightly. "Because someone told me you weren't with your friends." Her hand froze mid-air, the glass of water trembling slightly. She set it down carefully before turning to face me. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I mean, someone saw you last night, Melissa," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "And it wasn't with your friends. Do you want to explain that?" For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me like a deer caught in headlights. Then, as if flipping a switch, her expression hardened. "Are you spying on me now? Is that what this is about?" "Don't turn this around on me," I snapped. "You're the one who's been lying. I'm just trying to figure out the truth since you clearly aren't going to tell me." "I don't have to explain myself to you," she shot back, her voice rising. "If you don't trust me, that's your problem." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Trust? How am I supposed to trust you when everything about you lately screams that you're hiding something?" "I can't do this right now," she said, grabbing her bag. "I'm going to take a shower." I watched her walk away, my fists clenched at my sides. The conversation had gone nowhere, and the wall between us felt higher than ever. She was deflecting, dodging, and refusing to engage, and it only confirmed my suspicions. Whatever was going on, she wasn't going to come clean unless I forced her hand. Later that afternoon, as she napped upstairs, I decided to take the next step. I called Claire. She had given me her number at the coffee shop, saying I could reach out if I wanted more information. I didn't want to involve her more than I had to, but at this point I was desperate. "Hello?" she answered after a few rings. "Hi, Claire. It's Brian," I said, my voice low. "I need your help." "What's going on?" she asked, concern evident in her tone. "I found a number," I explained. "Someone she's been calling and texting constantly. I don't know who it is, and I don't know how to find out." There was a pause on the other end. "Send me the number," she said finally. "I'll see what I can do." "Thank you," I said, relief flooding through me. I need to know. I get it, she replied. I'll call you when I have something. Hanging up, I felt a mix of hope and dread. Part of me didn't want to know the truth, but I knew I couldn't live in the dark any longer. Whatever Melissa was hiding, I was about to find out. The hours after I sent Claire the number felt like an eternity. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, hoping it was her with answers. But most of the notifications were irrelevant: work emails, spam texts, and one message from Melissa asking if I wanted her to pick up dinner. The casualness of her text sent a wave of anger through me. How could she act like everything was fine when I was unraveling at the seams? I replied with a simple "no thanks." I couldn't bring myself to say more. Finally, around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed with a call from Claire. I answered immediately, my hands shaking. "Claire, I found out who the number belongs to," she said, her voice cautious. "Are you sitting down?" I sank into the couch, my stomach churning. "Just tell me." "It's someone named Daniel. He works at a marketing firm downtown." I asked around. "He's been spotted with Melissa more than a few times." The name hit me like a freight train. Daniel. My mind raced as I tried to place him. Then it clicked. Daniel was someone Melissa had mentioned in passing months ago. A new contact she'd made at a networking event. She had been so casual about it, even teasing me that he was just a nerdy work guy. I had laughed it off at the time. Now that moment replayed in my mind with a sickening twist. "Are you sure it's him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure," Claire confirmed. "Brian, I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." I closed my eyes, trying to process the information. "Thank you," I managed to say. "I don't know what I would have done without your help." "Take care of yourself, okay?" she said softly before hanging up. I sat there in the silence, staring at the wall. Daniel. The name felt like poison on my tongue. The betrayal stung even more, knowing that she had woven him into our lives so seamlessly, so effortlessly. She had lied to my face and expected me to stay blissfully unaware. For the next few hours, I replayed every interaction Melissa and I had over the past year, looking for signs I'd missed. The late nights, the sudden excuses to go out, the subtle shifts in her behavior. It all pointed to Daniel. I felt like an idiot for not seeing it sooner. The next morning, I decided I needed answers directly from her. No more guessing, no more piecing things together from secondhand information. I wanted to hear it from her, even if it tore me apart. She was already awake when I came downstairs, sipping her coffee at the kitchen table. She looked up when she saw me, a neutral expression on her face. "Morning," she said, as if nothing was wrong. "Melissa, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm. Her brow furrowed slightly. "What's this about?" I sat down across from her, my hands folded on the table to keep them from shaking. "I know about Daniel." For a split second, her face betrayed her. A flicker of panic, a tightening of her grip on the mug. Then, just as quickly, she masked it with feigned confusion. "Daniel? Who's Daniel?" I wasn't playing her game. "Don't lie to me, Melissa. I know who he is. I know you've been seeing him." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, she dropped the pretense. "So what if I have?" she said, her voice cold. "What are you going to do about it?" The bluntness of her response took the air out of my lungs. I had expected denials, excuses, maybe even tears. But this was something else entirely. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why would you do this to me? To us?" She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Because I wanted to. Because I deserve to be happy. You've been so boring lately, Brian. Stuck in your routines, always working, never paying attention to me. Daniel made me feel alive again." I stared at her, stunned. "Boring? Melissa, I've been working hard for us. For this life we built together. Everything I've done has been for you. And I didn't ask for that," she shot back. "I didn't ask for you to put me on some pedestal and expect me to be grateful. I'm not happy, Brian. I haven't been for a long time." Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. It wasn't just about Daniel. It was about her rewriting our entire relationship, turning it into something small and insignificant. I had spent years believing in us, and now she was telling me it was all a lie. So what now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Are you leaving me for him? She hesitated, and for the first time I saw a crack in her armor. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe. I need time to figure things out. I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest. Figure things out? Melissa, you're married to me. You don't get to figure things out with another man while I sit here like an idiot. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to listen to this, she said, grabbing her bag. I'm going out. I stood up too, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Fine, go. But let me make one thing clear. The moment you walk out that door, our marriage is over. Don't think you can just come back and pretend everything's fine. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. For a moment I thought she might say something, an apology, an explanation, anything. But she didn't. Without a word, she opened the door and walked out, leaving me standing there, shattered and alone. As the door slammed shut, I realized this wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. This was about me finding the strength to let go of someone who had already let go of me. And while the pain was unbearable, I knew one thing for certain. I deserved better than this. The hours after Melissa left again were some of the hardest I've ever endured. I couldn't focus on anything. Her words, her indifference, they echoed in my head on repeat. I deserve to be happy. You're boring. I haven't been happy for a long time. How do you even respond to something like that? How do you move on when the person you've shared nearly a decade with reduces your marriage to nothing more than a failed experiment? I needed clarity. I needed something, anything, that would help me understand how we had gotten to this point. So I did something I'd been avoiding. I went into our bedroom and pulled open the drawer where Melissa kept her personal things. I felt guilty even as I did it, but I couldn't help myself. I wasn't looking for more proof. Claire's words and Melissa's confession were more than enough. I was looking for answers, for something that might explain why my wife had turned into someone I didn't recognize. What I found wasn't what I expected. At the bottom of the drawer, tucked beneath a pile of receipts and old birthday cards, was a small notebook. It looked unassuming, just a plain leather journal. But when I opened it, my chest tightened. Inside were pages of notes written in Melissa's handwriting. Some were short, almost cryptic, while others were longer, detailed entries. And then I found it. A page that made my hands tremble as I read it. He doesn't excite me anymore. I don't even feel like myself when I'm with him. Daniel is different. He sees me for who I really am. He makes me feel alive. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. This wasn't just a fleeting mistake. This wasn't something I could chalk up to a rough patch in our marriage. Melissa had been emotionally gone for a long time, and I'd been too blind to see it. I slammed the notebook shut and shoved it back into the drawer. My mind raced as I tried to process what I had just read. I felt a mix of anger, heartbreak, and, strangely, relief. At least now I knew the truth. At least now I knew where I stood. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a glass of water that I had no intention of drinking. The house felt emptier than ever, and for the first time, I allowed myself to really think about what life might look like without Melissa in it. It was terrifying, but also, in a strange way, liberating. When Melissa came home later that night, I was ready for her. She walked in like nothing had happened, as if we hadn't just had one of the most painful conversations of our lives. She dropped her bag on the counter and glanced at me. "Did you eat?" she asked casually, like she hadn't just blown our marriage to pieces hours earlier. I couldn't take it anymore. "Melissa," I said, my voice steady. "We need to talk." She sighed, clearly irritated. "Can we not do this right now? I'm tired." "No," I said firmly. "We're doing this now. Sit down." For the first time in a long time, she actually listened. She sat across from me, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "I found your notebook," I said bluntly. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before narrowing. "You went through my things?" "I did," I admitted. And I'm not sorry. I had to know the truth. She didn't respond, but the tension in the room was suffocating. I've spent weeks, months, wondering what I did wrong, what I could have done differently. And now I see it wasn't about me at all. This was about you, Melissa. About you making decisions that shattered our marriage. Her expression softened slightly, but she didn't say anything. I leaned forward, my voice quiet but firm. You made your choice, Melissa. Now I'm making mine. It's over. For a moment, she looked like she might argue. But then she just nodded, her gaze dropping to the table. Maybe that's for the best, she said quietly. Her words hurt, but they also gave me the closure I needed. I stood up, my heart heavy but resolute. I'll sleep on the couch tonight, I said. Tomorrow, we figure out how to move forward. As I left the room, I realized something. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe. The morning came too quickly. I woke up on the couch with a stiff back and a heavier heart. The air in the house was cold. Not from the temperature but from the silence that hung between us. Melissa was already awake, sitting at the dining table with a cup of coffee. She didn't say anything as I walked past her to the kitchen. I poured myself a cup and leaned against the counter, watching her. She looked tired, her hair unkempt and dark circles under her eyes. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. We need to talk about what happens next, I said, breaking the silence. She nodded slowly, but her eyes stayed fixed on her coffee. I guess we do. I walked over and sat across from her, the same place I'd been the night before when I told her it was over. We need to figure out the logistics, I continued. The house, the bills, everything. Melissa finally looked up at me. Her eyes were glassy, but she didn't cry. Do you really think this is it? That there's no way to fix this? Her question caught me off guard. I had expected her to continue being distant, defensive. But instead, she looked vulnerable. It made me pause, but only for a second. You made your choice, Melissa, I said, my tone firm but not angry. You chose him. You chose to lie, to betray the trust we built. And now, I'm choosing myself. She nodded, biting her bottom lip. I don't even know why I did it, she admitted. It wasn't like I planned for this to happen. I don't know. Things felt stale between us, and I didn't know how to tell you. I laughed bitterly. So instead of talking to me, you decided to blow up our marriage? You think that's an excuse? She flinched at my words but didn't respond. I shook my head, feeling the anger simmering just below the surface. You know, Melissa, I gave you everything I had. I worked my ass off to make sure we had a good life. And this is how you repay me. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. I'm sorry, Brian. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. Her apology felt hollow. Maybe it was genuine, maybe it wasn't. Either way, it didn't change what had happened. The damage was done. Sorry isn't enough, I said. Not this time. The rest of the day was a blur of awkward silence and avoidance. Melissa stayed upstairs for most of it, and I busied myself with anything I could find to keep my mind occupied. I cleaned the garage, sorted through old papers, anything to distract myself from the pain. But by the evening, reality hit me again. This was my life now. A broken marriage, a house filled with tension, and an uncertain future. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, wondering how I had ended up here. Around 8 p.m., Melissa came downstairs. She hesitated in the doorway, as if unsure whether she was welcome. Can we talk? She asked softly. I sighed and gestured for her to sit. What is it? She sat on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about the house and everything. Maybe I should leave. Her words surprised me, but I kept my expression neutral. Leave? Where would you go? I don't know, she admitted. Maybe stay with a friend for a while. I just think it might be easier for both of us if I'm not here. Part of me wanted to agree immediately. The thought of her leaving and giving me space to breathe was tempting. But another part of me, the part that still held onto some fragment of hope, hesitated. Do you really think that's the answer? I asked. Running away? I'm not running away, she said defensively. I'm trying to give us both some space. Maybe we can figure things out better if we're not in each other's faces every day. I didn't know what to say. I hated the idea of her staying, but I hated the idea of her leaving even more. It felt like a lose-lose situation, no matter how I looked at it. Finally, I nodded. If that's what you think is best, then go. But don't expect me to wait around forever, Melissa. If you leave, you need to understand that this might really be the end. She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I understand, she said quietly. That night, I helped her pack a bag. It felt surreal, like I was helping a stranger instead of my wife. As she zipped up the suitcase, she turned to me, her expression unreadable. I'm sorry, Brian, she said again. For everything. I didn't respond. I just watched as she picked up her bag and walked toward the door. She paused for a moment, her hand on the knob, before finally stepping outside. The door closed behind her, and with it, a chapter of my life ended. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been, wondering if I would ever feel whole again. The silence in the house after Melissa left was deafening. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the absence of her presence, the energy she once brought to every room. Even though the past few months had been filled with tension and distance, her leaving felt final. The quiet was heavy, pressing down on me in a way I couldn't escape. I spent that night pacing through the house, every room a reminder of what we had built together. The framed photos on the walls, the couch where we used to binge-watch TV shows, even the half-full closet in our bedroom. It all felt like ghosts of a life that no longer existed. I should have felt relieved to have space to think, but instead, I felt lost. I sat down at the dining table, staring at the chair where Melissa usually sat. My mind drifted back to the beginning of our relationship, back when everything had been easy. We used to laugh so much. We used to talk about everything. Our dreams, our fears, our future. Where had it all gone wrong? Was it my fault? Had I been so focused on work, on providing, that I'd missed the signs that she was slipping away? I poured myself a glass of whiskey, something I rarely did, and sat there for hours, replaying every moment of the past year. The late nights, the excuses, the distance. It all made sense now. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. The next morning, I woke up on the couch, my head pounding. The sun streamed through the blinds, too bright and too intrusive. I rubbed my temples and forced myself to get up. There was no point in wallowing. Life had to go on, even if it felt like mine had come to a screeching halt. I decided to start cleaning the house, hoping that keeping busy would help. I stripped the bed, washed the dishes, and even went through some old boxes in the garage. That's when I found it. A dusty shoebox tucked away in the corner, labeled Memories. Curiosity got the better of me and I opened it. Inside were mementos from the early days of our relationship. Movie ticket stubs, postcards from vacations, and handwritten notes we used to leave for each other. My chest tightened as I picked up one of the notes, written in Melissa's familiar handwriting. Brian, I love you more than anything. Thank you for being my rock. I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you. Hem. I sat there for a long time, holding that note, feeling the weight of everything we had lost. The person who had written those words wasn't the same person who had walked out the door last night. And maybe I wasn't the same person she had fallen in love with either. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart sank, wondering if it was from Claire or, worse, someone else with more bad news. But when I opened it, my breath caught. Brian, it's me. I just wanted to let you know I'm staying at a friend's place. I need some time to think. I'm sorry for everything. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. A part of me wanted to write back, to ask her why she was doing this, to beg her to come home and fix what we had broken. But another part of me knew that would only make things worse. If Melissa needed space to figure out what she wanted, I wasn't going to stand in her way. Instead, I replied with a simple, okay. The rest of the day was a blur. I tried to focus on anything but the gnawing emptiness in my chest. I called a couple of friends, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them what was going on. I wasn't ready for their pity, their advice, or their questions. I wasn't ready to admit that my marriage was hanging by a thread. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I had been so focused on trying to save my marriage that I hadn't stopped to think about what I wanted. Did I even want to fight for this anymore? Could I ever trust Melissa again, knowing what she had done? And if I couldn't, what did that mean for my future? The questions swirled in my mind, keeping me awake long after midnight. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads, unsure which path to take. One thing was clear, though, whatever happened next, I couldn't keep living like this. I deserved more than the scraps of a broken relationship. I deserved clarity, closure, and maybe even a fresh start. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a silent promise to myself. No matter what happened with Melissa, I was going to find a way to rebuild my life, one step at a time. The next few days passed in a blur. Melissa's absence was both a relief and a painful reminder of everything that had happened. The house felt bigger, emptier, and at times unbearably quiet. I found myself going through the motions. Wake up, go to work, come home, eat something or at least try to. Then lay in bed, staring at the ceiling until sleep finally took over. Melissa and I barely exchanged messages. The few texts she sent were short, almost mechanical. I'm okay. I just need more time. Hope you're doing all right. It was clear she wasn't ready to talk, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to anymore. Then, on a Friday evening, my phone buzzed with a message that made my stomach turn. Can we meet? I need to talk to you. I stared at the screen for a long moment, unsure how to feel. Did I even want to see her? Would this be another round of excuses? More half-hearted apologies? After a deep breath, I typed back, "When and where?" She responded almost immediately, "Tomorrow morning, at the cafe by the park." I hesitated but eventually typed, "Okay." The next morning, I arrived early, my stomach twisted in knots. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. An apology, an explanation, maybe even a desperate plea to try again. But deep down, I already knew the truth. Some things, once broken, can't be put back together. Melissa showed up a few minutes later, looking different. Not in a physical way, but in her demeanor. The confident, carefree attitude she used to have was gone. She looked tired, guilty even. She sat down across from me, folding her hands in front of her. "Thanks for coming," she said softly. I nodded but didn't say anything. I wanted her to talk first. She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days," she said, staring at the table. "About us, about everything I've done. And I know I hurt you." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "You did." She swallowed hard, looking up at me. "I don't know how to explain it. I got lost, Brian. I got selfish. I let myself believe that what I was doing was okay because I wanted something different." I shook my head. "You didn't get lost, Melissa. You made choices, and those choices destroyed our marriage." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't let myself soften. "Not this time." "I know," she whispered, "and I hate myself for it. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I had to see you one last time, because I need to ask you something." I exhaled sharply. "What?" She hesitated, then said the words I had been dreading. "Do you think we can fix this?" A heavy silence stretched between us. For a moment, I let myself imagine it. Going back, trying again, pretending that things could ever be the same. But reality hit hard. I shook my head. "No, Melissa, we can't." Her face crumpled, and she looked away, blinking rapidly. "I figured," she whispered. I let out a slow breath. "I loved you. I really did. And maybe a part of me always will. But I can't be with someone I don't trust. And I can't keep pretending that what we had is still there." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I understand." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, she reached into her bag and pulled out something. A small, folded envelope. "I wrote this for you," she said, pushing it across the table. "Read it whenever you're ready." I hesitated before picking it up. "What is it?" "Everything I never said," she murmured. "Goodbye, Brian." With that, she stood up and walked away, leaving me sitting there, staring at the envelope in my hands. I didn't open it right away. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. But as I watched her disappear down the street, I felt something shift inside me. The pain was still there, but it wasn't as suffocating. The weight of betrayal, of heartbreak, of uncertainty. It wasn't gone, but for the first time, I felt like I could carry it. Melissa was my past, and now I had to figure out what came next. I stood up, tucked the letter into my pocket, and walked away, not looking back. Not this time.